All right, we now welcome on Jeff Nadu, also known as Big Man on Campus from Barstool Sports. He's also the host of the podcast Big Man on Basketball. Jeff, how we doing?
Doing great, Carter. Thank you for having me, man. Always appreciate it.
Anytime. So give me your backstory. Like, where were you before Barstool, and how'd you end up there?
Wow. Well, look, I've been doing this since 2009. I remember I created a Twitter account back in 2009. What's that? 11 years ago.
Hmm.
I was 20, I think, or 19. And I always bet on sports. I've bet on sports forever, but Twitter had just kind of started out. I was on Facebook. I was ranting and raving on Facebook, and I found out about Twitter. Kind of fell into the gambling community on Twitter. Like I said, I've been betting forever, and I really just kind of started out with just tweeting, and then maybe a few years later, year or two later, I started doing kind of something like you're doing, where I just kind of got a mic and I just started talking. And initially, nobody listened, and I didn't really have. I was just doing it just for practice and that kind of thing. But the goal was always to, I had a regular job. I was just a regular person. I was always gambling, and my goal was to try to create an opportunity to get paid doing content. And I started doing content with a company and kind of grew a following, somewhat of a following, and just kind of worked my way up. And I've always, for like 3 or 4 years now, I've been cool with Big Cat. I've always known him. We talked about sports betting and basketball and stuff. And Big Cat's always been very cool in the gambling community. I know a lot of gamblers that know him, and he's always been very integral in that community. So I started talking to him. I gave him basketball picks, and one day we were talking, and he mentioned that he knew I did content. I was kind of interesting and funny and kind of a character. And he asked me about, did I want to go meet Dave? And at that time, Barstool was still at the old office. They'd really kind of just were there. They were only there about a year. And Dave had mentioned, he reached out to me and said, it was just one random day. I got a DM from him. He said, do you want to come up and talk to me about content? So I got on the train and went up to New York. And they obviously, like I said, I had no gambling people at that point. They weren't connected with Penn or anything. And I remember walking in that day because there was an elevator right outside of his office. And I remember walking in, and he looked at me immediately and said, wow, he goes, you look like central casting. You look like exactly what a gambler would look like. And we sat down, and he mentioned that, they had a lot of interest in getting more into the space. They'd always kind of been into it. And, for a while, it was just kind of a connection we had. And, it just never kind of made like sense, I think, for them. And then they moved to the new office. They got connected, and they actually offered me a job last year, and it just wasn't the right time for me. I was going through some things in my personal life, and I have a website and I have different sources of income right now. So it just didn't necessarily work. And last winter, right before the virus hit, Dave reached back out to me, and we got connected. And I was actually supposed to start a Barstool in March, and about a week before my start date, coronavirus happened and the whole world shut down. And he kind of just made the expectation that, so come September, football's back, we'll get you on board. And it's been a long odyssey, man. Like I've told you when we were about to start, I've been doing this all a long time, and it was all very kind of surreal to just have an ability to do it somewhere big like Barstool.
So what's that relationship like with Dave? Because everyone's fascinated with him, and I don't like the workers. It seems weird with the relationship, in my opinion. Do you guys have any kind of relationship? Do you talk often, or is it just like, hey, just do your work and we're good?
Well, for me, it's a little different because I'm remote.
Hmm.
I'm not in the office every day. So, it's funny, when the gambling house was full fledged, I would see Dave weekly. Like we were there, all day, and we talked, all day there. But I would always say this about Dave. Like recently, we had a little bit of a run-in just with some of the things that went on, and he wasn't very happy with me. But I always say this about Dave: like he's always been very nice to me. He's always been very loyal as far as giving me an opportunity. I mean, as I said, I declined an offer from them one time, and he was really cool with always giving me an opportunity. And I definitely respect Dave. I think he's a terrific, tremendous businessman, and he's really self-made. And growing up, like my dad always owned his own business, and he always taught us to do that as well. And, I always have had offshoot kind of businesses and stuff that I was doing. So I always respect people that do it. And Dave created the company and made it into what it is. I don't see, and I think that's one of the reasons at Barstool that it's tough when you're remote, because I'm not there every day. I'm not on camera every day. Jeff definitely, coming up here as the holidays over, I'm definitely gonna be up there a lot more. But I would say I definitely think he respects me as a gambler and values my opinion. So yeah, I would say it's good. A little rocky recently, but it's good for the most part.
So you said you mentioned you're remote. What's
Yeah.
it like day to day working with Barstool?
I will say, like, one thing about me that's a little different from most of the employees, I'm kind of a similar employee to like Stu. Stu isn't like full time; he's not there every day. I still have kind of separate things that I'm doing. I do content only though for Barstool, so I can do like radio spots and stuff to promote like what we're doing at the company and with Barstool. But as far as like, I'm not necessarily there every day, so it's a little different. But a lot of the time I have a podcast now, so I spend a lot of time with college basketball and the NBA and that kind of stuff. And, really, writing blogs. And like I said, when we were doing the gambling house, we kind of stopped because of the pandemic, but I was doing that, and that takes kind of a whole day out of the week. So, everything I do is kind of Barstool related. And as I said, I'm going to start going up there a little bit more frequently, and we'll have the tournament coming up. So, I try to do whatever I can. But like I said, I'm a little different from most people where, like I said, I'm not going into the city every day. I'm not in the office every day.
All right, let's transition a little bit to the gambling. For people that aren't familiar with you, you're a huge gambler. You mentioned that earlier, a huge sports bettor. But, like, how long do you spend on your picks? How do you make your picks exactly?
Well, look, I mean, that's kind of a loaded question. I would say for me, like, whenever I'm asked that, it's tough to respond just because since I was a kid, I've always been very good with like just remembering things and kind of being able to know things on the fly. So a lot of the things that I see, I immediately store in my head and just run with. So like, for instance, like college basketball, like most of the work that I do, you would be actually quite surprised at how little time I'm spending, because once you start accumulating data and accumulating numbers, I can probably kind of just give you a thought on everything. So it's really for me about just taking a look at the line, understanding the situation, doing a little of the injury, that kind of stuff, looking at that and just kind of running with it. As far as approaching different things, pro sports are a little different than college. I think college is a little bit more numbers based. You got to look more into the makeup of the team. When you're looking at the NFL, a lot of it has to do with just the number and kind of like situationally. So like the NFL, I can just almost kind of look at games and tell you the way I would go just on the number. A lot of it's about what people are betting and what the number is. It's all real different though. Like, college, a little bit more numbers based, and I got to spend more time with it, but it's tough to answer your question because I probably approach the card differently than most. On a Saturday afternoon, I don't need to spend as much time because I know what's going on with, Alabama State, and I know what's going on with Kentucky. So it's just really about shoring up. If I see a line that doesn't make sense, well, what's going on in that game? Is there someone out? And I watch a lot of basketball. I spend, I stay up very late at night. I'll sit here and I'll watch, the night's games. I'll go back and look at the box scores. I'll look at kind of what went on in the game, because I think it's important to realize that when you watch a game, the final score can tell you something, but it might not be indicative as to what happened. So I think it's important to go back and look at what happened the night before, what happened 2 days before. It's a really kind of complex business, but it's kind of, I just have probably more time than most to spend on it.
So are there certain trends you follow, or are you more of a gut gambler like Big Cat is?
Yeah, the whole gut thing, I think it's something that's important. Like when you have a feel on a team and you have a team that's working for you, for instance, in college basketball, there's a team called Drake. They're a team out of Iowa. They're in the Missouri Valley Conference. Right now, they're 10-0 against the spread. They've covered every game. So, I think when you find teams that are really good against the number, you have to kind of go with your gut and just kind of ride it until the wheels fall off. But I think it's important in those situations to establish teams that you like betting on. If you bet Drake, over the last 2 seasons and about 10 games, if you've bet, let's say, I don't know what the number of games there are, but I think they've covered close to 80% of their games. So you've made a ton of money backing Drake. And, that's merely just guts. But as far as trends are concerned, I think trends are cyclical just because a lot of people realize and don't realize that most of the trends that people are regurgitating are from like 2013 and like those trends aren't relevant to like what's going on now. Like I'll hear people quote trends from like 2010, and it's like, well, those are totally different teams. They could be different coaches. They're totally different systems. So I don't really bet much with trends. I think NFL it's probably pretty helpful, but and somewhat helpful, but I don't look too much at it. It's more about, in particular, basketball, looking at simple schematics. So like if you have two teams that are really fast from a pace perspective and they're fairly efficient, the more shots you get up, the more opportunity you have at betting an over and hitting an over. So it's just, how does a team play against a zone? So basically, if you have a team that can't shoot the ball, you might not want to bet them against a really long zone, and that's simple, just understanding personnel and understand coaching. And that's something that I spend a lot of time with, just kind of understanding.
Okay, so last week I talked to Greg Peterson. He's a huge college basketball gambler. I'm sure you've seen him on Twitter.
Yeah, I actually I've known Greg a long time. I lost touch with him a while ago, a year or two ago. It's funny because Greg is, and I'll say this very glowingly about Greg. Like I said, I haven't talked to him in a long time. I've known him forever though. When it comes to college basketball, Carter, there's probably, from an intelligence and information standpoint, there's probably two people that know more about college basketball than me or on the same level as me. Greg, and then a group called the Three Man Weave.
Yeah.
All those guys are really good with stuff. And Greg he caps totally different than me as far as he bets a ton of games and I'm a little different. So yeah, I know Greg.
Yeah. So I interviewed Greg last week. He gave me his best gambling story. I got to hear yours.
Wow. It's funny. I think a lot of people just assume, and Greg's a little different because I think Greg still lives in Vegas and he's lived in Vegas for some time. I live in, outside of Philadelphia. I think a lot of people just assume like we all live sexy lives and we, do this and that. Look, I'm no different than anyone else. As far as a gambling story that I always remember, this was probably right around the time when I got on Twitter, maybe a year or two after. I had a regular job. I just moved into the apartment that I'm in now. I've been here, going on 7-8 years now. I remember it's a college football game. I was betting fairly low limits. I mean, I was just starting out. Like I said, I had a regular job and stuff. And I remember there was a game. It was Oregon State against Cal in the Pac-12. It was a late October, November, around Halloween. It was like it was cold tint in the air. And I remember seeing this game, and it was back when Oregon State had a kid, Sean Mannion was the quarterback. They had a kid, Brandon Cooks, who's now in the NFL. He was at receiver. And Cal, bro, was really bad. Like, terrible. Like, really bad defensively. They had a guy, Stunny Dykes, was their coach. They were just terrible. They gave up tons of points. And I remember Oregon State was home. They were laying 10 points in a game. And I just had a feeling, it goes back to your feel, that I just loved Oregon State. I just had a feeling they were going to win 42-13 or something, a big blowout. And I remember at the time I was going out a ton. I was going to clubs and stuff a ton. And I remember that night I said to myself, I'm going to bet a lot of money. I don't know at that point if it was necessarily responsibly, but I bet a fairly large amount of money, a lot more money than I had normally bet, probably 20 times the amount of what I was betting at the time. And I remember sitting in my house. I had the screen door open in my apartment, and I just sat there. It was a 10:30 game, 10 o'clock kick, whatever it was. And I was shitting bricks, man. I was so scared. I remember sitting there, and I watched the entire game, and I remember glowingly, it was at halftime. It was 35-10, and I was winning. And I remember the game ended up finishing. I want to say it was 42-10. It was something crazy. And it ended up like hitting the exact score that I remember saying in my head. And it was a bad kind of, from a bankroll standpoint, it probably wasn't the smartest thing to do. But that's the important thing as a gambler and somebody that's doing this, is you have to kind of learn from mistakes, and you don't really deviate ever from those. And that's just a memorable one I have. That was almost a decade ago, probably at this point.
That's insane. You're not a parlay guy, are you?
No, I don't bet parlays. I think parlays are really are sucker bets. I think a lot of people have these, and I always relate parlays back to, have you ever seen Rounders? Okay, so in Rounders, there's a scene where Michael McDermott goes and he's desperate for money because he's got to pay this Russian bookmaker and loan shark, and there's like a piker kind of gambler that he deals with that's like really tight with his money, but he makes money and he earns money for like his life. Like he's a gambler. And I remember he goes to the Schwitz and he sees this guy and he kind of says to him, like, I need whatever money you can give me. And the guy kind of tries to teach him that life and gambling is not about pipe dreams. It's about surviving and trying to create and grind out a profit. And I think all these bettors have these aspirations that, you know, they're going to be the guy that hits the 10-team parlay for, you know, 200x what they bet, or they're going to be the guy that buys Bitcoin at 4 cents and it's not, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And like, I've always said, like, it's incredibly hard, man, to win one game. Like you put a lot of time into winning one game, you know, to magnify. And I'm not saying I never do parlays. I could probably count on one hand the amount of parlays I've done over the last calendar year. But, you know, I think it's, and when I was early betting, like in my career, I remember going back and looking at my ledger of bets that I was making over a week. And I would see like, I bet like $25 parlays, like regularly. And that was back when like a unit for me might've been $50. And it's like, I'm winning 400 betting $50 a game, but I'm paying back $250 in these stupid parlays. And it was cutting into my ROI and the amount of money I was making. And I said, you know what? Like, it's hard to win one game. I'm just going to focus on this. And it's funny because I talk all the time to like people at the barbershop or just guys that are just starting out gambling. And they're telling me about how they hit a 10-team parlay for, you know, 2,000 or whatever. And I often say to them, like, well, how much money have you like invested in these parlays? So like, if you invested 2,200 in parlays and you only won once and it was like for 1,900, you've lost money doing it. But it's kind of like the guy at the lottery stand that like tells you about how he won last week for 200, but he's wasted 750 the last 2 weeks. So it's just, I've learned like my own beats throughout my life. And that's why like I have my podcast. And I know a lot of people don't think that it jives, and it doesn't necessarily jive with the rest of Barstool. Barstool is funny and they're really kind of just, they have a great time. And I'm not saying I don't either, but I like to have fun with the show, but I also like to try to teach people the things that I've learned and the things that I've found over the years. And, you know, if I can just get one person to say, you know what, like that really helped me, or I've become a better, you know, gambler. I was just a hobby, or I try to do it more and it's worked. You know, that's great for me.
Yeah. So before you go, you're a huge Eagles fan.
Yeah.
What was that last night? I mean, are you okay with it or?
Yeah. Well, look, listen, I think one thing that I try to always convey on Twitter is I know that one thing I have to realize is, and where are you from?
I'm from North Carolina.
Okay. You're from the South. Yeah. I could tell by your accent. You're not from where I'm from. So where I'm from, when I say something, it's mostly taken as, you know, normal. Like people say crazy shit. Like people are boisterous and talk with their hands and have fun. And they're not a problem. It's not a problem to tell somebody, you know, F off basically. But, you know, last night I had some fun with it because, you know, I hate the Giants. You know, I hate the Cowboys. I hate the Redskins. So for me, the NFL is about surviving. You know, it's hard to win games in the NFL. And we were in a position last night where the difference between the 9th pick and the 6th pick, especially for this team and the state of where they are, is gigantic. And, you know, Doug Peterson has for years conveyed this stupid nonsense that, you know, we're going to play hard no matter what the situation is. And last night, you know, he finally wised up and said, you know what, you know, we're not going to adhere to what they want us to do. He made it really clear before the game, at least locally here, that, you know, Sudfeld was going to play. And does it hurts, you know, kind of maturation? No. They're moving on from Carson Wentz. I've heard from people in you know, that are close to the team. Carson Wentz is not going to be here next year. It's pretty simple. You know, the fractured relationship is there. And, you know, I didn't have a problem with it. In fact, I thought it was pretty funny at the end of it just because, you know, Giants fans actually have the nerve to complain and whine. Even the players have the nerve to whine and complain that the Eagles didn't help them. First of all, we hate the Giants. Second of all, you should have beat us in October. You wouldn't have to worry about it. You should have won more than 6 games. It's pretty simple. They lost 3 of the last 4 games, Carter. That's pretty. I mean,
I watched.
I can't say it any clearer. You know, it's like I don't know what else to say. I can give you water, but if you don't drink it, that's on you. You had the opportunities and you weren't able to get it done. So I thought it was great. And it was funny because people took it so seriously. I'm going to tell you, if that was in Philadelphia last night doing that, if Washington did that to, let's say, the Giants, nobody would have said a word. But it's Philadelphia, and we're an easy punching bag for the rest of this country. It's funny, too, because I don't know how many NFL games you've been to, but whether you go to Oakland or Las Vegas or Atlanta or Minnesota, they fight in the stands. They fight in the parking lots. Why does it only Philadelphia that has to hear about something that happened 40 years ago, throwing snowballs at Santa? First of all, if you know the story, it was a shitty Santa. The guy sucked. Like, people didn't like him. He sucked. But it's cyclical because people just complain and realize that it's Philadelphia. That's why it was such a big deal.
You still want Doug Peterson?
For me, it's more Howie Roseman. I think Howie Roseman is the major issue with this team. Howie Roseman has failed miserably at addressing the needs of this team for years. I wrote a blog at Barstool about a month ago about the failure of this team to draft a quality receiver. I mean, it's fascinating how bad it's been. Truly, in my entire lifetime, they've never done it correctly outside of maybe Deshaun Jackson. He's the architect of most of this crap, and he's the architect of not understanding that if you bring in a guy like Darius Slay, if you put a grocery store cashier on the other side, the team's just going to, attack that guy. I mean, it's pretty simple. The roster makeup, you have 10, I think 12 players above the age of 30 on this team. It's just really brutal. Howie Roseman is the problem. And I also tell you, man, that I don't believe that Carson Wentz is the problem. Case in point, Carter, really quick. Look at Josh Allen. Josh Allen's a prime example of a difference between a year. Okay. Last year, Josh Allen was not good. He had issues. He had consistency problems. And if I ask you to tell me what was one thing last year that Josh Allen lacked from a personnel standpoint, would you be able to tell me what that was?
His receiving core.
You're a smart kid. Exactly right. What's the difference this year and his play regarding and his personnel? Can you tell me the difference?
The best receiver in the league right now is Stephon Diggs.
Right. I mean, it's pretty simple, man. And this is an issue that the Philadelphia Eagles have had for years, decades, frankly. I go back to when I was younger, Donovan McNabb. Donovan McNabb, up until 2004, 2005, they didn't give him one weapon. 4 years straight, he was throwing to the mechanic down the street. And then you go get him Charles Owens. He goes to Super Bowl. He didn't win, but still, I mean, you look at the 1 year Carson Wentz was really good. He actually had a pretty decent and good core. I mean, Alshon Jeffrey was at, a higher peak. Torrey Smith was terrific. He had Trey Burton. He had guys that throw Zach Ertz was playing at a high level. If you're going to belittle Carson Wentz, and this team, I'm going to tell you right now, Carson Wentz will leave this team, and you know what's going to happen, Carter? He's going to go – he's going to go to Indianapolis or New England, and a good coach is going to figure him out, get him what he needs, and he's going to go win a Super Bowl somewhere. I'm going to tell you right now, they're giving up on him. Carson's made a lot of mistakes. Don't get me wrong. But look at his offensive line. Look at the weapon. He has no weapons to throw the ball to. They can't get open, man. It's like it's laughable. It's like having a Ferrari and taking the tires off and putting cinder blocks as the tires and not putting gas in it. It's not going to run as effectively unless you give it the right tires and the right oil change. It's stupid. It makes no sense.
Do you want Devontae Smith or Jamar Chase?
Well, look, Devontae Smith, I don't think is going to be there. I did a mock earlier, my first mock, and I'm a big mock guy. I do a lot of mock stuff. I don't think Devontae Smith's there. I think Jamar Chase will be there. If you're asking me who I would take in a perfect world, Smith for sure. Yeah. The problem that they have is, what did I just say 5 minutes ago about this team's ability to draft? They can't do it. So it's imperative that they allow themselves to move on from Roseman. And yeah, look, in my opinion, they have to take a receiver. There's really, Devontae Smith is, I'm not saying he's a Julio Jones type of player. He's not the same, build. He's not as tall, but I think he has the ability to be the same type of player. I mean, case in point, really quick. Last year, I vilified this team because they took Jalen Reagor, okay, out of TCU. Does it surprise you at all, Carter, that every receiver of note after or before Jalen Reagor, so whether Chase Claypool, Laviska Shenault, CeeDee Lamb, T. Higgins, Justin Jefferson's
the worst one.
Every one of those players has played significantly better than Jalen Reagor. And to make it even more laughable, last year they drafted a guy called John Hightower out of Boise State as a 5th-round pick. Now, I'm not calling out 5th-round picks because they either work or they don't, but this is laughable. So they drafted John Hightower. A few picks later, the Chicago Bears drafted Darnell Mooney, okay? Darnell Mooney has actually had a pretty good season. I mean, I think he has 4 touchdowns. He has like 600 yards receiving. He's averaging 10 yards a reception. Like, John Hightower, I think, doesn't have 1 touchdown. He might have like 10 catches on the season. Like, it's really unbelievable how truly bad they are at scouting talent and how it just never works out. John Hightower, by the way, Mooney had 11 receptions yesterday. Think about that. A 5th-round pick.
How many did Hightower have?
How many did John Hightower have? You really want to know? John Hightower. No, let me tell you this. On the season, now keep in mind, Mooney had 11 receptions yesterday in 1 game. Hightower has 10 on the season. I mean, seriously. What is going on with this team? It's wild.
Well, I don't want to take too much more of your time, Jeff. So once again, go check out Jeff's podcast, Big Man on Basketball, and go follow his Twitter at Jeff Nadu, and go check out the Barstool Fund if you have money, and please donate. It's a great cause. Jeff, thank you so much, man.
Yeah, no problem, man. Always appreciate talking to you. Let me know if you ever want to have me on again. Thanks.
Of course. You're the man.